Hey everyone, this is Stephen Straughn at Cast Iron Cookware. We can find information to help you better collect, restore, and use cast iron cookware. Today we're going to be talking about some of the history of Birmingham Stove and Range, and I'm going to use my number 7 skillets to tell the story. So we're going to do that coming right up. Today, before we get started, I just want to remind you, if you're not a subscriber, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Also, hit that notification button, that way you won't miss out on new videos when they come out. Okay, just to kind of set the pace of where we're going to kind of go back to the beginnings of Birmingham Stove and Range. There was a time where there was no Birmingham Stove and Range. There was only Atlanta Stove Works, and they mostly produced stoves and things like that. They eventually expanded and opened up a foundry in Birmingham, Alabama. And the original foundry burned, and I believe the foundry was rebuilt and finally finished in 1917. At that point, they built an enamel shop, and they also had an in-house pattern shop where they made their own patterns for their hollowware. So I kind of believe from 1917 up until 1922, they were making hollowware. Now, they were also making stoves and other things as well, but I believe they were making pans. But I mean, why would you have the pattern shop if you didn't have the stuff you were going to make with the patterns? We do know in 1922 the Red Mountain name came to play, and they definitely started making hollowware at the time. Now, their Red Mountain line began with the Red Mountain stoves, but you know, if they're going to make the stoves, they're going to make the hollowware to go along with it. Now, Red Mountain started in 1922, but later on they filed for a patent in 1926, and in the patent they said that they had already been using the Red Mountain name for 4 years. So we believe they were making skillets at that time. I also found out that in 1921 that Birmingham Stove and Range was using 10 tons of pig iron a day. That's a lot of iron. Now, I know they made a lot of stoves, but that's a lot of iron. So they were producing a lot of products. And it just tells me they had to be producing cast iron cookware at that time. Not to mention the fact that they had their own pattern shop. Now, like I said before, why would you have a cast iron cookware pattern shop if you were not making cast iron cookware? So let's get us a start here with our first Red Mountain number 7. Now, I'm only using number 7s for this particular video. And right here we have a number 7 Red Mountain. And if you can see, this 7 looks like it's hand scribed. It looks like, now it is pretty straight, but it doesn't look really neat like some of the others. And I've done a measurement on the heat ring on this, and it is exactly 7 inches. And that is where the 7 came from. It was not the whole dimensions of the pan, it was for the stove eye. If you had a stove eye, you would pull that stove eye out of your stove, and this would sit right down in its place, and you'd have a sealed contact with the heat inside your oven, thus the name heat ring. It's not a smoke ring or a fire ring, it's a heat ring, and that's where the size came from. Now, the tricky thing is, you had different stove companies making their heat rings, say a number 7, that might be a little bit smaller, might be a little bit larger. That was another marketing strategy, I do believe, as well, because if you had a Birmingham Stove and Range stove, you're only going to buy Birmingham Stove and Range pans because the others don't fit so well. So this one right here is really put together well. It's got large pour spouts. The inside is just as smooth as glass. The outside looks really nice too. And don't forget the telltale Birmingham Stove and Range triangle handle, or the ridge handle, and the teardrop hanger hole. That is another trademark of Birmingham Stove and Range. I say trademark, it's another identifier, because they didn't trademark it, but it was an identifier. But this one here is really neat, and I believe it was probably made in the very early days of Red Mountain, probably even before they started using the name Red Mountain. I wouldn't be surprised if this one was made in 1917, 1918, 1919, 1920. Now, the Red Mountain name come along in 1922, but I do believe they were producing hollowware before that. If anything, they were making prototypes. Now, I have another Red Mountain skillet, and it also has a similar, now this 7 is a little bit rounded. It's not straight. It still looks like it's hand scribed. A little bit on the shallow side. The heat ring is still 7 inches, but it has smaller pour spouts. Can you kind of hold them up? Big pour spouts, small pour spouts. I believe this is one of the earliest ones, probably between 1917 and 1922. I'm going to use the word circa. Now, circa means kind of thereabouts in time. So kind of thereabouts, or circa 1920s. And this one right here, because I'm just going to say I believe because of the small size and the small pour spouts, that it's probably not the earliest one. Now, it is still slick as a button on the inside, and the casting is very, very nice. Of course, you know, we have the telltale triangle and teardrop hanger hole. I kind of believe that this one right here would be more likely made in the 30s. Just my guess. Now, it could have been made in the 20s or even the 40s. But I think because it is 7 inches across, like the other one, smaller than the later Red Mountains, that I believe it's older. Maybe not quite as old as the one with the large pour spouts. And here we go. We have another Red Mountain, number 7. And it still looks slightly hand scribed. But I measured the heat ring on this one, and it is a lot larger than 7 inches. It is more like 7 3/4, give or take a little bit, depending on how you measure it. And I would almost want to say that the first two was kind of in the prototype range. Anytime you start a business, you're going to make some prototypes. You're probably going to make a few of one or maybe hundreds of one. But we also have kind of large pour spouts, and we also have more of a prominent edge, where the other ones you don't see a prominent edge. It kind of just fades off. But you see the prominent edge on the one that I believe is a little bit newer. So I'm kind of thinking that I have 3 generations of Red Mountain here. That I have maybe one that was probably made in the teens and 20s, another one that was probably made in the 30s, and this one here probably made in the 40s. So I'm not guaranteeing this. I'm just going to say these are circa ages. Circa 20s, circa 30s, circa 40s. And what I've learned with patterns are kind of expensive to make. So if you've already made a pattern that works on the first generation, and you're still making cast iron, and that pattern is still good, even if you got a new pattern, you're going to still use the old one. So I really do believe that there was lap over on all 3. I imagine they used the old patterns till they were wore slap out. Now in the 1950s, things changed a lot. Birmingham Stove and Range came out with what they call the Century Series. And I think probably because it was somewhere around 1950 and 1954, I'm going to use the term circa again. Kind of the circa 1950, 1954. And I sort of believe that's where the Century name come from, because it was mid-century, namely the Century Series. And this started somewhere between 1950 and 1954. And we have the more stylized, or the more descriptive, I guess is the best word for it, size and numbers. You have the NO.7. You even have the size in inches. And this one right here is 10 1/8 inch. And we also have more of the prominent edge around it. And if you notice, it's a little rougher in texture because of the process they use to make these. Of course, the inside is still slick as a button. It's been milled. But if you notice, this one right here, it does not have made in USA. It is one of the earlier Century Series skillets. Now, in the 1950s, they started off with the Century Series, And not too long after that, they came out with the automatic DISA machines, or the Disamatic machines. That's why you see a little rougher casting. That's when you see a little bit thicker casting, because it holds up a little bit better. Because when they were hand pouring it, they could take a little more time, a little more care with it. But when you start mass producing something, you have to make it where it can hold up to the machinery and also to the mechanical process. So I believe they were doing a lot of hand pouring from 1950 on up until the 60s. So you see a lot of the hand finished Birmingham Stove and Range Century Series that is still has the descriptive lettering plus the really smooth surface on the inside and the casting that looks really smooth even on the outside. And in 1965, Birmingham Stove and Range put in their first Disamatic machine. And that made the process so much faster, but it also made it to where they didn't spend as much time with it, but they were mass producing. By the way, Birmingham Stove and Range was the first company in the United States to use the Disamatic machine. And in 1967, they put in their second DISA machine. And at that time, Birmingham Stove and Range was the most modernized cast iron cookware company in the United States. And in 1968, they went ahead and put in number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, number 7, and number 8. At that point, they had 8 Disamatic machines running at one time. And they were producing tons, I mean literally tons of cast iron. It's recorded that Birmingham Stove and Range was using 60 million tons of pig iron every year. 60 million tons. Now that is a lot of iron. So you know they were producing a lot of cast iron. So there should be cast iron all over the country, and I believe there is. We just don't seem to find it as readily as we want to. But let's go back to the first century piece that I showed you. Now it doesn't have Made in USA. It just has the descriptive size on it. Has a very smooth interior. And you'll see not too long after that, probably in 1967 and 1968, you'll see the introduction of the Made in USA. And this one here has the descriptive lettering. And somewhere along the line, they came up with the idea, if we done away with the 8 and the 7, or combine the 7 and the 8, we would have more room to put out more of them. So instead of making a 7 and 8, they could just go ahead and make 2 of these. So they came out with this particular size here. And it is the 8-7. And it is 10 1/4. Where the original was 10 1/8. So it's a little bit larger than a 7 and quite a bit smaller than a number 8. So they were trying to fill the market of both pieces by one piece. It was a great marketing strategy. And you'll say, well, did they do away with the 8 altogether? Well, not really, because like I mentioned earlier, patterns were expensive, and they were expensive to make and to repair. So chances are the 8-7 and the number 8 and the 7 were all rolling down the assembly line at the same time. You got to remember, they had 8 Disamatic machines. So they probably had DISA number 1 had the 8-7, and DISA number 2 had the 8-7, DISA number 3, all the way up to maybe DISA number 8, and it had the 8 and the 7. So they were coming down the assembly line at the same time. I'm sure that they would use a mold until it was wore slap out, until it could not be repaired anymore, and then they done away with it because it was expensive to make. So I believe that a lot of these pieces came down the assembly line at the same time. Some with USA, some with not USA, some with the 8-7, some with the 8 and the 7. Also, we're introduced with another Made in USA pattern where the Made in USA is in the center. So I'm trying to put together a set of center Made in USA's and top Made in USA's. So it's a little bit ambitious, So I'm hoping to do that, but I'm sure these all came down the line. And this particular one, I'm sure it's a newer version because it is not milled. It looks a lot like the Modern Lodge does today. It's just like it was coming out of the Simatic machine. I believe they cleaned it up some, but they did not grind them or mill them anymore at this point. And I'm not even sure when the 8-7 came into play. I'm probably going to say it came into play somewhere in the 60s. Maybe late 60s. I'm not really sure. I don't know if anybody really knows. But I also believe the 8s and all came down the line at the same time until the pattern was just wore out. I think they just continued that up until they went out of business in 1991. So we're going to kind of recap everything really quickly. I believe the early Red Mountain series probably started in 1917 and ran up into the 20s. And then what I would call the second generation Red Mountain series probably ran somewhere in the 1920s up into the 30s. And then when the size changed and it became a little bit larger, I believe it went all the way up into the 50s at that point. And I'm sure there was a lot of overlap, especially considering that patterns were expensive. So there was a good chance there was overlap all the way around. And possibly some of the Red Mountain series was even overlapping into the Century series. And I've even heard it said that some of the Red Mountain patterns were used for the Century patterns. So there's a lot of overlap, and there's no way to pin down the dates right down to the year because the ranges overlap each other. I really do hope that you've enjoyed this video and that you found it to be informative. That is my goal from the very beginning, to help people learn how to better collect, restore, and use cast iron cookware. And I want you to learn more about it. I want to learn as I go, and I'm learning all the time. And I appreciate you watching this video. And also want to remind you to not forget to subscribe if you're not subscribed. Share and like this video, because every share, every like, every subscription counts. It helps me look good to YouTube so I can grow, and that way I can bring more content to you. Also, I'd like for you to check out Cast Iron Cookware on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We'd love to have you following us there. And you can also become a member of the Cast Iron Cookware Facebook group. I will leave a link to that as well. It's a growing group. We're kind of small, but we're having a great time. And if you would like to be a part of Cast Iron Cookware and supporting this channel, you can also check us out on Patreon. You can become a Cast Iron Cookware patron for as little as $1 a month. And believe me, every penny counts to going toward buying new equipment and producing more videos. My channel is small currently, so my budget is really small. I really want to produce more videos. I really want to share. I want to be part of the education and part of the history, because I believe the history of cast iron cookware is extremely important, not to mention the people who love using it. So thank you again for watching. I really appreciate you so much.